Welcome to me rambling about Kingdom Hearts for the length of this video. This isn't a recap or a review or an analysis or a recommendation video. It's just me talking about my thoughts and experiences as I played through the Story So Far collection leading up to Kingdom Hearts 3. Think of it kind of like a podcast with some gameplay of the game I'm talking about that isn't always going to be related to what I'm talking about on screen. That's just in the background to keep people busy and occupied. I felt that if I was going to be putting so much time playing all these games, I should at least do a video on it to justify, because it's kind of taking time away from me doing other videos for people who actually watch my channel, like the Hitman videos. I haven't been playing the Hitman series as much as I should be because I've been playing the Kingdom Hearts games, and I think it would be fun just to talk about it. My history with the series is that I accidentally started with KH2 first because that was the game that was just gifted to me, and I love Kingdom Hearts 2. It's probably one of my favorite games ever. The combat is just so smooth and nice. It's borderline character action, I'd say, especially on like level 1 critical mode. I played Rechain of Memories for like 30 minutes as a kid because my parents accidentally bought that for me instead of one when I asked for it for Christmas, and I got to like Traverse Town in the tutorial and I did not enjoy the card system at all. It just felt too weird and was just not what I was expecting. Then I played through probably like the first half of KH1 at a friend's house before I moved, and then never finished it, and I forgot it all up until like Wonderland, until I got the Story So Far collection and started playing it again. I'm recording these as I finish the game, so if I complain or say anything doesn't make sense in the story contained to that one game and it's later explained in a future title, then that's why. Also, if it's not obvious enough, I'm going to be spoiling everything. So if you care about the story for these games, don't watch this. I doubt that I'm going to have any hot takes or any opinions that are going to piss people off, really. So let's just kick back, relax, and enjoy talking about and discussing this really enjoyable series. KH1 to me feels like an excellent proof of concept game, especially going back to it after playing 2 first, where you see, oh, here was like the ideas they had that they would later improve and make better in KH2. Not that that's a diss at KH1, I still think that game is incredibly good. There's just some areas that are a little rough around the edges, and even with the final mix, I would love them to go back, even though I know they will never do it. Just change a few things. Like, for example, Riku Fight 2, where you're in Hollow Bastion. Like, if you just made the arena slightly bigger so the camera wouldn't freak out when you're up against the walls, I would say that it's not on par, but it gets close to Virgil Fight 2 for me as like amazing one-on-one boss fights. Once you start leveling up and getting more abilities that are combo extenders, then the combat really opens up and you're like, wow, there's actually a lot here, because at the beginning it's a little primitive where it's just 3 strikes and then you start over again, but close to the end of the game you're just fucking soaring through the air. I could see where people maybe wouldn't like the idea that you have such like limited points to decide what are your abilities for combat, but the idea that you could customize your combo path is cool. Really reminiscent of stuff like God Hand, of course, but it's not as technical as that, but the idea is there, and I'm a sucker for any game that allows you to customize your combo paths and add more variety into the combat, even if there is like clear better options like the strike raid spam, because it makes you invulnerable. Halloween Town is still my favorite world in every game. Nightmare Before Christmas is my favorite Disney movie. The designs for Sora, Donald and Goofy and all the Heartless are on point. It just looks fucking amazing. Pumpkinhead is one of my favorite Keyblade designs, and Jack Skellington was my favorite party member to always have on me. The only world I really didn't like in this game was Atlantica, and that's mainly due to how much I hated the giant Ursula boss fight. I think that's the worst boss in the game. I assume that's probably what everybody else thinks if they had the same experience I did, where half the time I would fucking swing at her face and the Keyblade would go through her head and deal no damage. I think it's just an all-around terrible boss fight, which is pretty disappointing because all the other ones leading up to it were on point and really fun to play, even if they did have some annoying aspects to them. This is a boss fight, I guess, that really tests your patience and willing to put up with bullshit. I don't know if this is supposed to happen during the boss fight, but once she got to her final health bar, all she did was continuously spam the AoE lightning strike around her, so I could never get in without taking damage. So the only way I could ever beat her was just go in, hit hit her once, heal, hit her once, heal continuously, and have nothing but mana haste and mana rage on, so I can just continuously keep healing myself because it just turned into a DPS race because there was never an opening to get near her. It feels like a bug or like it mess up with the AI where she should have been doing other moves. Maybe there's some sort of way to stop her from spamming and stun her that I just happened to miss, and if that's true then this complaint is just completely on me. But even if you exclude this potential player error, the whole problem I had with the hitboxes of her face where it just doesn't deal damage just completely ruins the boss fight to begin with. I also wish that the mermaid kick or whatever it was called was on a different button, because multiple times where I just found myself either just trying to go up or down and then without me wanting to, it would do the mermaid kick and just send me in a direction and I'd end up getting hit by something. That feels more like user input error, but I just fucking wish that you just allowed me to remap my controls. While on the topic of boss fights I didn't really enjoy, all the flying ones were rather lackluster for me, especially the two at the end of the world. The final boss of this game is just pretty flaccid. It felt like such a poor way to end the game, especially after such a great fight with Ansem 2 minutes prior. I know it sounds like I'm pretty negative towards the game, but I really enjoyed myself playing it and I still think it's really good. I just don't really have the attachment that I do for it like I have for Kingdom Hearts 2, where I absolutely adore that game. I'm really glad I gave Rechain of Memories a second chance with this collection because I absolutely fell in love with this game. This is a perfect example of a diamond in the rough that has a ton of great ideas and well executed in some places, but then there's sloppy and amateurish mistakes in others that kind of bring it down to an extent, but if you look for it, then there is gold in this game. It took a little bit getting used to the card system, not gonna lie, it was kind of confusing at first. I would say it almost feels overwhelming with how you have to keep your eye on your deck and where card positions are, and you have to keep the stack number in your head, so it's like, oh, if I put these together, because if your deck's not organized at first, then it's just random bullshit, so you're like cycling through trying to get the right combo for slights, and you have to keep your eye on where the enemy are and what their slights are stacking up for organization bosses. For the first few hours it's really weird because the game wants you to take your time and not spam, but you're so used to just playing KH1 style that you're just like mashing, and it's like, no, you can't do that. So you just gotta tell your brain to slow down, and then the pieces start falling into place for the combat. Originally, I recorded a few lines saying how I was on the fence with how I didn't know if I liked or disliked how the game just devolves into spamming the best slights and reloading over and over again, but then something clicked in my mind and I was just like, wait, this turns into a rhythm game. Especially during the final boss, where it's just like, oh, I gotta keep in the rhythm, gotta break his card and then do the combo, especially because he's floating in the air, so I can't hit him. So I gotta make sure I do it at the right time, and holy shit, does it get so much fun. It just like recontextualized this system for me. And then you get to Riku's half, which feels like a completely different game. This is what I imagined in my mind what card-based combat was gonna be like. One of my friends mentioned that this game was very rushed, and they could have just easily reskinned Riku to play exactly like Sora, so it's really cool that they had their own systems for him and he plays completely different. My only qualms with this game are I didn't enjoy having to grind for door cards. I spent like 3 hours at one point on Destiny Island just trying to get a fucking 2 to get to the last door, and every fight that I had would just drop every number but 2, and it was so infuriating. Then there's amateurish mistakes. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the inability to swap lock-ons. If there is a way to swap it, I don't see it, and there isn't a controller configuration like you see a PNG of the controller and like arrows pointing toward the buttons saying what to do. Since it's a Japanese PS2 game, it of course has like inverted controls for certain things, and there's no way to change it, and it drives me insane. Like, I got used to it eventually, but at first the rotating of the deck, RB sends it left and LB sends it right. That just drove me fucking insane early on because I just kept killing myself going the wrong way. I feel like this game really fights against itself in some areas. Like, I wish they took this card system and just had the Castle Oblivion stuff and just kept it at that, because a lot of the Disney worlds in this are just so redundant and boring because it's just retreading old ground from Kingdom Hearts 1 because of its memories bullshit. And for some reason, all the cutscenes were super blurry and like half the screen, like it was, I know it's not like a camera, but it felt like in a movie where the foreground is in focus but the background is not focused. and this isn't intentional, like two characters are having a dialogue and they're slightly apart from like across the room and they're talking and looking at each other, and then the person in the background is just blurry. Like, it looked like there was no anti-aliasing in this game at all in the cutscenes, because there was just jaggies everywhere. Faces were all blurry, textures were all off. You could see the seams of the world. Like, I could so many times just see in cutscenes, oh, that's where they put the textures together for the room, and I could see the world box. But that's not really that much of a detractor from the game. All the organization fights are fun as hell, and I would definitely say, I know I said this wasn't a recommendation video, but to anybody who wrote this game off as bad, I would say give it another shot, because you just have to put in some effort to make your deck not shit. And then once you do that, then the game just becomes so much fun and really opens up. I don't really have much to say about 358 since it's just a movie. I really wish they did do a recom treatment for this and made it a game, because I think some of the boss fights would have been really cool, like the ones at the end that they tease in a way, because it shows the start and then it shows the ending because there's no middle ground. From what my friends have told me who have played this is the worst Kingdom Hearts game. It controls like ass, and the level design was incredibly repetitive, having you do the same shit over and over again. So I think it would have been really cool to have a reimagining or a recreation of the game that stays faithful to the story, but makes the combat and the overall gameplay more fun. Roxas is my favorite character of the main groups, and his interactions between Axel and Xion are great. I love it. It's so entertaining, which is really why I want to have an actual playable version of this game that isn't trapped to the DS. There were some really awkward dialogue cuts though, where they'd be mid-sentence, and as they're getting to the last word of said sentence, it would just cut them off and jump to either somebody else or the next scene. There was also just overall really awkward dialogue. It seemed like they just took lines from the Japanese script, threw it into a Google Translate, and then had the actors read it, because some lines were just so grammatically incorrect and awkward. Like, no one talks like this. It feels like no one actually went back, read through it and went, that looks weird. That sounds off. Overall, I do think this is a really entertaining movie. The only downtime that got really annoying was all of these scenes that are just text on a JPEG'd background of what's supposed to be happening, because I assume those scenes were just actual gameplay and they didn't want to make anything new, and they just used the cutscenes they made for the original 358 and then downsampled to fit on the 3DS. All I can say is I hope that the other two movies are just as entertaining as this one. Kingdom Hearts 2 was one of my favorite games ever, so playing the final mix version with all the new content, I love it even more. They've pretty much improved KH1 in every way imaginable. This is a near perfect game. I love it so much. It could have its own video just talking about mechanics that this game improved on from the first one, similar to the Ratchet & Clank video I did calling it a perfect sequel, because I think this absolutely is. The only thing that I think is weaker in this game are the Disney World's overall stories, because all of them are just following the movie beats with Sora, Donald, and Goofy mixed into it along with the Organization 13. So returning worlds feel like we're kind of doing the same thing again, because now we're doing the movie story beats instead of the self-contained stories from the first game. The two biggest in my mind that have this issue are Little Mermaid in Atlantica and The Beast Castle for Beauty and the Beast. For Atlantica, the first game ends, it's like, okay, King Neptune has come to understand and accept Ariel's fascination with the outside world. And he's like, okay, I don't have an issue with it, especially after he broke the trident in her room. Well, she has all of her knickknacks, and she got very upset with him. That's how Ursula got power. And then you get to the second game, and he's back on his bullshit again, complaining about, oh, Ariel, the outside world, it's dangerous. And it feels like we're doing the same thing again. Especially when Ursula shows up and then tricks Ariel again. It wouldn't be more of an issue if the first game didn't happen in a way, because it still makes sense in its self-contained story why she listens to Ursula, but the fact that this already happened once more, and how she first interacts with Ursula, she's like, "You're Ursula the witch." Like, you saw her in the first game and she turned your dad into the fucking lady who buys chocolate from that SpongeBob episode. I played through the final mixed version on critical mode, and I have to say, this is probably the best balanced hardest difficulty I've ever played. This puts other games to shame. Alright, I'm cutting in here from a later recording after I beat the other games. This difficulty is even better than the later critical modes, but we'll get more into that when I cover the later games. It's just so incredibly fair. It's insane. They give you the right amount of abilities at the start so you don't feel like you're handicapped. It doesn't just feel like, oh, enemies just deal more damage or have a million more health, or they don't stagger or have super armor. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps you attentive. The only room that I think in the entire game that's really unfair on critical mode is the final room before the data org. That just feels really annoying, and it's more so that I really hate those nobodies that grab you, because I just don't know how to stop that, because they don't stop the grab from guarding or using reflect. When I think of harder difficulties, I just think of really obnoxious bullshit for the most part. Fighting games, it's usually just, oh hey, they read my inputs so they know my every move. In FPSs, oh, everybody has aimbots and wall hacks so they know exactly where I am if I budge out of any sort of cover. Playing a Call of Duty game on Veteran is the most miserable experience I could think of in an FPS. In worse third-person action games that focus on melee combat, hardest difficulties just cranks up the health bars by 11, so you're just there whacking on them for hours. Usually they get super armor, or they just don't stagger anymore, so it feels like you're just playing an MMO raid boss where there's no hit stun or any sort of response from your actions, so it's like, what am I even doing? So after saying all of that, seeing how well balanced this game's hardest difficulty is such a breath of fresh air. I was legitimately worried that going into it, because all my friends said play the hardest difficulty, critical mode is the way to play 2FM, that it was just going to be utter bullshit and I was going to end up hating the game. And it was the complete opposite. It made me love the game even more. After I finished 3, I plan to go back and do a level 1 run on critical mode, because I didn't have any faith in myself to do level 1 run the first time, and honestly I was just trying to make it through the game so I can get to 3. I did spend the most time on 2 because I love that game and it felt like I wasn't wasting my time, but I didn't want to make myself be completely stuck because it was too difficult for me and then end up spending 60 hours on the game when I could have just spent 30. I would describe KH2 Final Mix as a boss fight carnival. There are so many amazing boss fights in this game, so many memorable ones, that it puts other games to shame. Again, of course, no game is perfect, so there are a few stinkers for me in this game, so I'm just going to quickly mention those and why I dislike them and get them out of the way. The Barbossa fight, just boring. Just spam freeze at him. Just an uninteresting, bland, all-around boss fight that's just not fun at all. The Pirates world isn't really that fun to begin with. Its level design is really annoying with how there's so much shade, and there's like almost no sections of moonlight when fighting the pirates, so just, hey, if you're doing an air combo, or you're doing any combo even, and you knock the enemy back, there's a potential you knock them into the shade so you no longer deal damage to them. The second boss fight of Port Royal, the Coin Heartless, whatever it's called, I didn't enjoy that either. It was fine up until the final stretch where he takes the entire chest of doubloons. It just felt like such a slog to get all 880, I believe it is, back. All the boss fights for the Pride Lands are pretty lackluster. That's probably the worst world for me in the game. I just don't enjoy how Lion Sora controls. It feels like he's a poorly built go-kart with no brakes, so he just slides everywhere. The boss fights are just, not fun. Pretty boring. There's no interesting back and forth or anything. It's just, oh, to protect Timon and Pumbaa. Oh, hit Scar a bunch, but watch out for his move. And then the big one was just, This world is pretty lackluster, my least favorite of the game. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some of my favorite boss fights, starting with Marluxia. This is such an excellent back and forth. This is a boss fight that really tests your reactions, being able to block and see things coming. My only complaint with it is that it feels like it's a little too long for what he does. Like, by the time I had him down to 3 or 4 health bars, I was just just like, okay, Marluxia, you've shown me everything you've got. It's kind of just, we're going through the motions at this point. But I was told that the boss fights scale potentially with levels, so maybe that's why, because I fought him at like level 54, because I kept dying when I tried to fight him the first time at level 35. So that might be the reason why it just felt too long, because I waited, because he was the final organization battle, because he is definitely the hardest of the absent silhouettes. I do want to take a step back for a second to talk about an amazing mechanic of this game, or just an overall design choice. It's with how fluid and clear all of the animations are for all of the humanoid boss fights in the game. Nothing is obscure or obfuscated to the point where you're like, what is this animation? Is this a wind up for an attack? Are they just moving around? Everything is completely clear and understandable and presented to the player in a way that they can learn the more they play against these boss fights, especially some of the later ones I'm going to be mentioning in just a few minutes. Fighting these boss fights, you can see over time you start picking up things like, okay, here's where in the animation that I still have a window to hit him. Something I noticed with all of the organization members, as long as enemies' knees are still bent, they have not fully recovered, so you could actually continue to attack them and they won't retaliate yet. This applies to pretty much all of the humanoid boss fights in this game, and is a very useful tool that I figured out against a lot of the difficult ones close to the end game, including the optional bosses. The feeling I get from learning from just looking and playing at the boss fight and not having to look up a guide or anything, it's just like, this is something I internalized and figured out for myself, is so rewarding and great. This is a feeling that I think is really lost with a lot of games recently. But to circle us back around to my original point is how amazing these organization boss fights are. All of them bring their own unique twist and gimmicks to the combat system to make them really engaging. The only one I think is really weak is, I can't even think of his name. It's the Tomahawk organization member. I've been playing through the later games past 2 with a friend who is a hardcore fan, because he wanted to see my reactions after I was starting to go in blind for games. And anytime I bring this guy up, I could not remember this organization member's name. It's like, it's not Luxord, because Luxord is the card guy. He's so forgettable. He's just a jobber. He was a jobber in Recom, and then he's never brought up again. I don't even remember. Like, I know some spoilers of KH3 before I played this, because I still yet have played the game, but it's been out for a bit. I don't even think he's in that game. Like, that's how much of a forgettable jobber he is. His boss fight wouldn't even really be that bad. It's just the fact that Reflect and Guard just completely nullify everything he does. The AI just can't compute what I'm doing after I guard. The whole fight is just, okay, if I press the guard button or if I reflect, he can't do anything to me. He has nothing. His desperation move, which he goes outside of the arena, and it's like, oh man, this is really hype and it looks intimidating, and then I just blocked it with the basic parry and nothing happened, and he just stood there like mouth agape going, well, that's all I got. For long-time viewers of my channel, they've probably heard me mention a few times in previous videos, there were a few things from my childhood that I was never able to accomplish in video games. One of them was getting the nanotech boost on Planet Dobo and Ratchet & Clank Going Commando. The second one was beating the PS2 Neopets The Darkest Fairy game, which is just a knockoff Zelda clone. And then the third one was beating Sephiroth in KH2. This boss was so difficult. I can't tell you how many hours I must have wasted as a kid just trying to beat this boss. I got so close as a kid multiple times, but I would always die to the flame pillars that suck you in, which in this I'm not sure is a bug or intentional, but the flame pillars try to suck you in towards them, so when I would try to fight back and then let go of the stick, it would rubber band me forward, flinging me closer or farther than I was ever intended to move. I actually died a few times because of this, because I was just rubber banded back right into a flame pillar and it killed me. When I eventually beat him, it took me like 3 days even now in 2FM. It just felt so fucking good. The rush of relief and just, suck it, Sephiroth, I never have to fucking fight you again, you piece of shit. Now I'm gonna whine like a scrub about this boss fight, because it feels like the most unfair of the fair fights. I think it's the arena that really pisses me off. It just feels too small to fight him, especially when he's teleporting behind you and the camera can't keep up at all. I would have much preferred it if I was in an arena like Lingering Will. Well, maybe not as big as Lingering Will's arena, but definitely a size up for what you fight him in. It's not as bad as Mysterious Figure and Birth by Sleep. It's a little too small for my liking. Now for the final boss fight I'm going to talk about is my favorite and the best boss fight in the game, the Lingering Will. Everything about this boss fight is so fucking cool. Let's just start talking about the lore of this fight. I love the idea of just a suit of armor that has been reanimated by the soul of someone so angry that they don't want to die and they want their revenge. This is the stupid, extreme anime dumb shit that I live for. The design of the Keyblade armor is fucking cool as shit. It's amazing. It really reminds me of Nomura's designs for Batman that he did a while back. I want to say like back in 2012. I can see the similarities there. I love how Nomura draws armor. It's so interesting. It's like a mix between European style armor and then Bushido samurai stuff. It has this perfect blend where it doesn't even clash with each other, which you'd think usually it would. I can now safely say without a shadow of a doubt, this is my favorite boss fight ever. It is also the hardest boss fight I've ever fought. Prior to this fight, if someone was to ask me what was my favorite boss fight, I'd probably go, Virgil Fight 2 from DMC 3, and then right under that would be Artorias from Dark Souls 1. Those in my mind are really fucking cool fights that are excellent back and forths between a character that's pretty much on equal footing with you. Not so much for Artorias' case, because he does have the power-up abilities, and he's definitely much larger than you. But now, after fighting the Lingering Will, it takes its place above Virgil Fight 2, and kind of has retroactively ruined boss fights for me because it's so good, and I just keep going, man, nothing's gonna top this. If you've noticed that the footage that I used for this fight is lower quality than the rest of it, that's because I streamed this boss fight for 9 hours. I started streaming at attempt number 1 and didn't stop until I beat him. Now, although not all 9 hours was spent fighting him, I did take a small 45-minute break to level up dry forms so I can get the max level glide from final form, and I need to level up summons because I greatly underestimated how useful those are in this game. Stitch is the real MVP of this boss fight. From start to finish, you can just see my progress as I'm learning the boss. At the beginning, I could barely get through 1 health bar, but by the end, I was perfectly parrying all of his desperation attacks. No boss has got my heart racing like the Lingering Will has. The attempt that I managed to beat him with, he teleported away with 1 sliver of health, which I was told later on is intended if you don't beat him before he hits this threshold. After almost 9 hours of attempting this boss fight, when I had him down just to that last sliver of health and I'm going for the finisher which would end the fight and he teleports away, my heart just sank. No boss has ever made me feel like that, and for that, this deserves every bit of praise it gets. The only thing I would like them to change about this boss fight is make the Rising Slash's hitbox or hurtbox, whatever term you want to go with, actually where the sword goes. Because multiple times I just get hit because the hitbox or hurtbox is like 2 feet all around the sword. So I'll be nowhere near it and then I'll be killed. Like in this clip here, I'm around the rock, yet he hits me from behind it because the hurtbox is extended past the sword and not just the sword itself. When I finally managed to beat this boss fight, I felt so rejoiced, so relieved, so accomplished. I had turned my mic off and just started listening to music so I could focus instead of entertaining people in the chat, that when I tried to turn back on my mic, I was just fumbling because I was so excited. I could barely contain myself. And I'm gonna put a volume warning here, and we're gonna watch my reaction to when I finally beat him after 9 long hours. Suck my dick, Terry, you stupid bitch! Woo! Going into Birth by Sleep, I had been warned by many a people that it was going to be a noticeable downgrade from KH2. What I didn't expect was the game to make me ill while playing it. Yes, in fact, this game gives me horrible motion sickness anytime I try to move the camera. Now, I have 2 specific issues that I have ironed out and figured out what causes with cameras in video games. The first big issue is FOV. If games don't have a wide slider for the FOV, at least over 110, then I'm probably going to get a migraine. unless the gun is not nearly taking up as much space. The example I always use when explaining this to friends is Overwatch. Back when I played it, when it first came out, the FOV slider only went up to, I want to say like 95, maybe 100, which wasn't nearly enough for me. So when I played heroes with guns like Soldier 76 and Reaper that take up huge sections of the screen, I just kept getting migraines. Then the second camera issue that makes me sick when playing games is the way the camera sways and moves. Now I know I said at the start of the video this is going to be a podcast and you could watch this without having to actually look at the video, or you could just listen to it like, let's say, in your pocket with headphones on, but for a lot of Birth by Sleep and what I'm talking about in it, you're going to need to watch the video because all of my explanations and issues with this game are visual. So what makes me motion sick with this camera is how it moves. While I move the stick, after I stop moving it, the camera still moves for another 2 seconds. When moving the camera back and forth because you're in a crowd surrounded by a large group of enemies, it creates almost a swaying motion like you're on a ship with a lot of waves in the water. Couple this with the fact that a lot of the areas for this, especially in the beginning worlds, are very small and narrow corridors, which the camera does not agree with at all. See, in a lot of other action games, especially those of the third-person melee combat focused, when this happens, they will just allow you to go through these objects instead of just forcing it to go closer to you, which for a lot of this game, the camera just completely shits itself and can't keep up. Not to mention how most of the boss fights, except for the few at the very end of each character's story, are all monsters way taller than the player characters, which makes the camera have to look up to see where the hurt boxes are, because you can't just hit the legs, because a lot of them you need to hit the box at the top or whatever body part they decide, so the camera just gets shoved right up the character's ass. So to solve the issue of me becoming sick anytime I attempted to play this game, I just completely gave up on the right stick entirely. The only time I'd ever move the camera was when I used the lock on, and even then it still freaks out quite a bit, especially if you're up against walls or in tight areas, when it tries to realign to targets you want to hit, and then sometimes it just automatically locks you onto an enemy you weren't even near or trying to hit. This game is such a downgrade in every conceivable way compared to previous titles. It has worse levels, worse keyblades, worse performances, worse music, worse controls, worse camera, worse boss fights. I just don't understand. I was not expecting going into the Story So Far collection to have a game that I ended up hating so much. There are some things I do like, which we will get to eventually while talking about this, but there are a lot of things I really didn't like, and I need to vent this frustration. I feel like I should put this little disclaimer here before I move forward at all. If you enjoy this game, more power to you. I certainly could not, and I'm glad for you, because I dislike this game does not invalidate your enjoyment, nor do I think you're stupid or any less of you for enjoying it. I personally just do not like this game, and I'm about to list every reason why. This game is a technical mess, and that's being generous. Everything on the technical side of this game boggles my mind, how they did not see any of the issues with this during development. My friends who had played the original PSP version upon release, and some who even imported it early because it was not simultaneously released in America, said that those versions are even worse. Let's just start out with overall movement. Right off the bat, as soon as you gain controls of anybody, it feels stiffer. It really feels like this game is being played in a full body cast. Animations are long, sluggish, and uncancelable. There is no combo variety, hardly any enemies stagger, and the worst of all, air combat is unresponsive and floaty. I've seen in comment sections and responses and discussions for this game around the internet and how people don't understand what floaty is. So for anyone who still doesn't get it by now or believes it's not a real thing, let me show you right here. The best way to demonstrate this is just jumping in the game as any character. For this demonstration, I'll be using Terra with the high jump. Once he fully completes his jump, you'll notice that he just stays stationary in air for a brief period before falling down slowly and then creating a faster descent before he fully touches the ground. Me doing a sloppily job of counting the frames, this is roughly about 49 frames, which is almost a second full of lag. This issue is only made worse when you actually jump and attack. Once you start your attack animation, Terra won't even begin to fall to the ground until he's completely finished his swing arc, which is roughly like 75 frames, which is over a second. This same issue persists even when you're using the basic jump. This just leaves you open to so many attacks that it's pretty much not worth to use the air combo system at all. If my explanation was still not good enough and you still don't get it, look at Terra when he jumps. Terra does not start his descent until his left knee is fully bent upwards and his right leg is fully flexed down. Only then does he start to actually descend.
Funnily enough, both Sora and Terra have the same jump animation. Even in 2, there is what people consider the floaty delay of jumps in it, but that's only if you hold the jump button throughout the entire animation. Anytime you let go of the jump button, you will start your descent, which makes you wonder why and how it was even included in a later title when previous ones had this perfectly figured out and had a fine system for it. Sora and Terra also share the same mid-air swing animation, except for Sora it doesn't magically prop him upwards and completely stop all momentum he had in his jumps. Even when he's swinging, he's starting to descend, because swinging a melee weapon in mid-air would not make you completely stop all movement, but make your descent faster.
Now I find that Terra's floatiness is the worst of the 3, which doesn't make sense in my mind. So you could have a floatier character or someone who's lighter so they fall slower. But Terra is the heaviest of the 3 characters. His attacks are slow and very strong, so if a brick shithouse is jumping, wouldn't it make sense that he would fall the fastest and not the slowest?
I wouldn't even mind how stiff Terra plays if he was the only one who was like this, because they're diversifying how each character plays, because long, uncancelable, powerful swings with a lot of stopping power behind them, due to Terra putting all of his strength and force into his swings, is just how he fights, justifying his differences between Ventus and Aqua, both in universe and in gameplay mechanics. Having an action game with multiple characters that play vastly different from each other is great. Some of my favorite action games have characters that don't play like each other at all. Nero and Dante are not the same character. They have very clear differing gameplay mechanics and overall control and feel. The same goes for Kiryu and Majima, 2B9SA2, and Raiden and Sam. But the issue shows in this game when all of the characters share the same problems.
There's even just a simple solution to this, and that is just to remove the few frames of the animation where they're just floating in air for no reason, making their descent faster and completely invalidating this issue altogether. Now let's talk about the combat. Basic melee combat has no combo variety at all. You're going to be doing the same 3 hits over and over again until you trigger either a combo style or a finisher. Where all the magic happens is in the command system, where you have your command deck. The command deck is where you load up a bunch of either spells, items, or physical attacks, and then pressing triangle to do them, and then they will go on cooldown until they're ready to be used again. I'm personally not a very big fan of cooldowns in action games. I feel like you should just balance the moves around being able to use them, making them either be unsafe or have long windups instead of just, oh hey, they're on cooldown for longer or shorter depending on how good they are. But the command deck is completely unbalanced. There are 3 good moves in the entire command deck that are so laughably better in every conceivable way to anything else that it just feels like you're wasting your time putting yourself at a disadvantage for no good reason if you're not using them. They're especially needed if you're playing on any of the harder difficulties, which I think are a massive downgrade compared to the critical mode of KH2 Final Mix. Why should I deal half damage if I want to play on the hardest difficulty? Why am I being punished for wanting a challenge? This doesn't make the game any more difficult in any sort of fun way. All it does is just extend the tedium that the combat already has due to its poor damage scaling, but we'll get into that in just a few minutes. The by far best move in the game, Thunder Surge. It is a dash forward that does an AoE lightning damage that also gives you invincibility frames, which are very useful for Terra because his dash has almost none of them. It is also incredibly useful by the fact that almost none of the bosses stagger at all. So that makes you completely safe to charge into them, because their swings won't hit you. Next up is Mind Square. You place little explosives on the ground and the enemies walk into them and it does a fuck ton of damage. Not really much to say other than that, it's just ridiculously good.
And the third and final move is Ignite. And this move's only really good against bosses due to the fact that its burn damage stacks, so you just hit them with 4 ignites and entire health bars melt away in seconds.
This is really good against bosses like Vanitas, which just keep teleporting away anytime you even touch them because they have no staggering. The way you make new moves in this game is to meld 2 abilities that are max level together to make a new move. Okay in theory, but the issue is that the money economy in this game is completely fucked. What I mean by this is you're going to be making a lot of abilities in this game, especially if you want the good ones, which means you're going to be purchasing a lot of them, leveling them up, and then merging them together to make more. Or you could just make Thunder Surge, which is the best move, and then buy 6 of them. Either way, you are not equipped with enough money to actually ever do this. In most games, you start off with low amounts of money given to you, or experience, or souls, or whatever metric of currency the game has, and then as it progresses, it scales up, rewarding you more and more as the game goes later on. This game does not have that, which then requires you to have to grind, or as I did, just go to Disney Town, go to the pinball room in the sewers, and then do this for 3 hours. Along with money not steadily progressing through the game, your levels and damage don't really either. Unless you are leveling dry forms in KH2 or summonings in any of the previous games, you probably never stopped to actually have to grind because your damage was inadequate, and that's because the game has a steady flow of level progression. If you're just playing through the game, you're going to be adequately equipped to do anything you want, so much as you didn't just run past every Heartless encounter you had. But even then, KH2 is completable at level 1. In this game, you could be in one world one-shotting the Unversed and having no difficulty in the combat at all, and then go to another one in the same group as them and then be struggling to deal any damage at all. This even persists on the beginner difficulty, which I then played for just to get through it and see if there was any differences at all, which there aren't because I still ended up having to grind for 2 hours to get levels like I did for the other characters. The game in general just has a lot of padding and time wasting things for you to do. Sure, I guess you could see this as it has a wealth of content, but none of it ever goes towards anything meaningful. It's just to distract you and extend the runtime. I really hate how with this game, Keyblades no longer have special abilities that make them unique and usable in varying situations like in the previous games. Instead, they're just glorified stat sticks that boost your strength and magic damage, and that's it. They're also all fucking ugly. I hate every single design of all the world Keyblades. The only ones I like were the ones each character gets at the end of their story. Bosses either don't stagger at all, or they have super armor for no reason. All the unversed boss fights don't react to you hitting them at all. It feels like I'm playing an MMO, which is not why I play an action game. One of the biggest reasons why I don't like a lot of MMOs is just none of the enemies ever have responses to when you hit them. They have like set animations after a while where they like flinch back, but they don't respond to individual attacks themselves, making player feedback from inputs completely non-existent. So it feels like I'm not actually doing anything and I'm just watching a number go down, which is how I felt through every unversed boss fight in this game. The only boss fight in the game that has proper staggering throughout the whole fight is the old Xehanort boss fight before Tarek gets body snatched, and this fight shows why this game really can't have proper staggering with how it's balanced. It is by far the easiest boss fight in the game because Xehanort just can't do anything to you. If you have a deck full of Thunder Surges, you could just infinitely have him staggered and stunned, just going Thunder Surge, Thunder Surge, Thunder Surge over and over and over again. The way Kingdom Hearts 2 prevented the players from infinitely looping boss fights was by having the revenge value system. After a certain amount of hits and damage dealt to bosses, they will hit their revenge value, which will make them break out of the player's combos. Sure, there were still ways to abuse this revenge value system, like using Final Form's Firaga without using the finisher, because that for some reason didn't add revenge value, but unless you knew that, then you wouldn't be running into this issue at all. And since this game doesn't seem to have the revenge value system, enemies and boss fights just don't stagger, except in the occasional arbitrary windows which aren't even consistent, which just adds to more player confusion. And these stagger windows usually aren't large enough or long enough that allows the player to follow up with any sort of attacks, unless they're just using Thunder Surge, which gives the player even less of a reason to ever use melee combat. Then there's boss fights like Terranort, which have super armor during attacks so they completely ignore you, yet they still take the damage. Like right here in this clip playing now, I'm using the Counter Hammer, which is basically the retaliating strike from KH2 Final Mix, but he doesn't react to it at all. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't get knocked back, it doesn't interrupt his combo, it doesn't interrupt his anything, but he still takes the damage, so he's not invincible, he just has super armor and doesn't care. Why? This again just makes boss fights feel unresponsive, and it frustrates me to no end because I would have loved this final fight in Terra's story to feel amazing, because thematically and story-wise it is really fucking cool and I was super engaged. Then we get to performances, which are the weakest I think they've been in the entire series. And I'm not gonna blame the actors because they sound better in later games. They were just very poorly directed. Terra delivers lines so stilted and awkward, like he's never been a voice actor before.
The darkness, where did it come from?
Then you have lines from Aqua, which she just butchers, and they're in the game. She fumbles over her words and sentences, gets tongue-tied, or just mumbles, and they left those takes in. These two characters sound fine in 0.2 Fragmentary Passage, so they're clearly not bad actors. Then we get to the story, which at times really works, and then at others it doesn't. It feels like a first draft more than anything. Let's start with Ventus because I don't have much to say about him. I've seen a lot of people comment, oh, Ventus is a dumb shonen protagonist. He's a naive boy and he's always happy. I don't have any problem with this because it makes sense story-wise because he's a heart of pure light. And I like Jesse McCartney's performance as him because he's clearly doing a different voice and inflection compared to Roxas because they are two separate characters. Overall, I don't have an issue with Ventus. I just hate his gameplay because he deals no physical damage and he hits like a soggy newspaper. Then we get to Terra. Terra I like on paper. I like all these characters. All three of them are fine. I don't have an issue with them. I think they're good characters written into bad scenarios. I like the idea of Terra. He is a naive young man who wants to do what's right but is led down the wrong path by an authoritative figure in his life. But at times in the scenarios he's in, it just makes him look like a moron. When I heard people joke on like Twitter or in voice chat or in like Discord, people would be like, lol, Terra is just Anakin from the prequels. And I was like, okay, it can't be that bad. No, he's literally just Anakin. He's got a lot more better scenes than Anakin, but he's Anakin nonetheless. To the point where they share a lot of moments that are almost identical between the two. This game overall is like the prequel equivalents for this series. It sets up some things that a lot of people don't like the inheritance story for this and then the Metachlorians for the prequels. It has weird and awkward dialogue. So like I said a minute ago, at times Terra is understandable and justified in his actions, and then at other times he just seems like a colossal moron. He's understandably mad and confused when he sees Ericus trying to cut down Ventus for no reason, or at least for no reason to his understanding. But then at other times he just learns a lesson and then completely forgets it as soon as he gets to the next world, or he gets told something that's clearly obviously evil or wrong or a lie, and he's just like, that sounds good. Like right at the beginning of the game. We're not even 10 minutes in. He just failed his mark of mastery. Ericus says the darkness in you is a problem. You need to get it under control and do not let it run rampant. And then as he's leaving Xehanort, it's like, Ericus is a fool. Darkness is where it's at. It's actually super sick. Except way more evil and a lot more cartoony. Now, one friend justified it to me as, well, Master Xehanort is the best friend of Master Ericus, he's a well-respected leader. So it makes sense why Terra listens to him nonstop. But even then, if Ericus is basically Terra's father figure, they even mention it multiple times in this story. Let's say your dad tells you something's bad and wrong and you need to work on it. And then as you're leaving, your dad's best friend comes in and goes, hey, your dad's a fucking moron. What he says is wrong and he fears you and he's holding you back. Wouldn't some red flags pop up and like, that sounds kind of, I don't know about that one. This is really where the one-to-one parallels with Star Wars Episode 3 really start to come in. All the Disney worlds are pretty inconsequential and all around forgettable for this. The only one that I actually liked was the Lilo and Stitch one, because Lilo and Stitch is great. It's one of my favorite Disney movies, right up there with Nightmare Before Christmas. I loved the Lilo and Stitch TV show, so seeing Terra, Ventus, and Aqua all interacting with Stitch was adorable and I loved it. I think it would have really helped the story instead of having 3 separate campaigns that you have to go through. Have the game switch control between the characters as you're doing things in the story. The game has a timeline on the main menu that you could see where events happen in order. So why not just switch between the 3? Because I think that would have flowed a lot better. Because things just seem kind of choppy. Like Aqua seems really useless and somewhat incompetent. In both Ventus and Terra's story, she just shows up for a minute, says a motherly thing like to Ventus, have faith in Terra, and then fucks off and we don't see her at all. But then once you play her campaign, you see, wait, this is the most competent character in this entire game. The last 20 minutes of all 3 characters is the highlight of this game. My favorite is specifically Terra's. The fight between him as the Lingering Will and Terranort is nothing short of fantastic. The only issue is that the gameplay side of things really de-elevates what should have been a standout moment in the series. If I had to just point to why I think Birth by Sleep is a weaker game compared to any of the other games, but for this argument we'll say 2, I'll say look at the fight between the Lingering Will and 2FM. And then look at the fight between the Lingering Will and Terranort in Birth by Sleep. The contrast is night and day. I really wish this sequence was just in the Kingdom Hearts 2 engine. I think I'm just going to cut it here for Birth by Sleep talk. Going into making this video, I really didn't expect that I was going to be this negative or this critical about any of the games. I could probably go on for like another 15 minutes and have its own self-contained video about it, but I feel like that's just kind of unnecessary at this point. I really didn't want to turn this video into a fucking another critique video, and I just wanted to have fun with it, but I feel like it'd be more disingenuous if I just lied about how I felt towards this game, just to keep a status quo and not anger people, or just keep the video overall positive, because this game does have issues, and I feel like it would just be wrong to lie to people, because I think my opinion is somewhat unpopular based on how I see other people love this game. I really think if they just took another crack at this game and rebalanced it again and reworked a lot of things, that this could be the best Kingdom Hearts game.
So why does your mind resist?
I was actually really excited to go into Recoded because I heard that Sora and Roxas get to interact. They do, and it's by far the best parts of this movie. But like with Rechain of Memories, all of the Disney stuff is pointless, inconsequential, and wastes your time. There's not really much to say about this because again, it's just a movie, but only about maybe 50 minutes of this stuff really matters. I would just boot it up on YouTube, fast forward to anything you see with Castle Oblivion, Data Riku, Roxas, Data Roxas, and that's pretty much it, because all of the other things is just wasting your time and it's pretty boring. There's some important stuff that this establishes, but to see all that important things, you have to sit through so much unnecessary fluff. This movie could have been a lot better if it was just an hour long and they trimmed the fat of it, because this is unnecessarily 3 hours long. With how much I didn't enjoy Birth by Sleep, I'm happy to say I really enjoyed Dream Drop Distance. They pretty much fixed most of my qualms with Birth by Sleep on a technical level. There's still some issues which I'll get into, but the good outweighs the bad in this game. There is still the floatiness of the jumps, but it is vastly reduced. Basic combos don't feel sluggish and awful anymore. Basic movement feels really nice. Sora and Riku both move fast, and the controls are really responsive. Flow motion was a great addition to this game, but I have no idea how this would control on a 3DS, and I have to assume it probably didn't control that well. Like I said, the good outweighs the bad, so for this time, let's just get the bad out of the way right up front. I still don't enjoy how Keyblades have been relegated to stat sticks still, although the designs are a lot better in this game. The only Keyblade design I didn't enjoy in this game was the Hunchback of Notre Dame's, but the rest I do think were really cool designs. Every Dream Eater boss fight is completely forgettable. I couldn't tell you a single thing about them. They are all homogenized and look the same in my memory. The command deck is still broken in this game, except this time instead of having 3 good abilities, you have 1, and that's Balloon. balloon is so laughably overpowered that it just one-shots every single enemy. This is the final boss. Look how much damage I'm doing with this ability. The command deck also does the annoying thing where if you equip an item or change any of the mobility ones, the deck has to then reload. Why can't I just use items from my menu like the drop me knots? Because then it just makes me have to stand still and wait until my deck is fully reloaded so I don't go into combat and go, well, fuck, I can't attack them other than with basic attacks. While I think flow motion is really cool and fun, at times the camera can't keep up with it, and in order for the game to complement the flow motion mechanic, the levels were made larger, but all they did was increase the size. Every world is just rather empty. The drop system just feels kind of pointless because you have so many drop me knots and you could buy them unlimitedly. It just makes me wonder, why not just let the player swap when they need to or want to? What was the point of this system? It just feels unnecessary and tacked on, but that's more just a nitpick. That's not really a big issue for me. I know some people hate it more than I do, but you'll never run into a situation unless you're not paying attention to the gauge where you accidentally drop and switch to another character mid doing something. I didn't have a problem with this, but I could absolutely see where people will, so I'll use this point to transition into talking positively about the game, and that is the Pokemon-esque spirit system. You can create your own Dream Eaters to fight alongside you as party members using items and materials you pick up throughout the worlds and dropped by enemies. I didn't really deep dive into this mechanic, I just picked 3 for each character that I thought were cool or cute, leveled them up and got their abilities, and if they were good, that's a positive. If not, oh well, it wasn't that much of a deal. This is my son. I will raise him to be big and strong. I shall feed him oats in order to expand. I can see if people got really into this mechanic and tried to collect all of them or min-max everything to get the best possible options that they would absolutely hate it, because it does seem really tedious. But if you don't get too invested in it, then it's fine, which pretty much sums up this game entirely. It's fine on the surface, but if you look deeper, it has issues, just like its critical mode is also terrible again. This game, though, does have some of my favorite Disney worlds to appear in the series. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Three Musketeers, the extended areas of Traverse Town, and the Prankster's Paradise are all great additions that really pick up what I thought was lacking in the last few entries for Disney worlds. Then there's my thematically favorite world in this game, and probably in the whole series, and that is the Symphony of Sorcery. I love how there's no talking during the musical sheet areas, and it's just sounds. You don't even hear any combat barks or any responses from when getting hit. All you hear is sound effects and music. I love how everything you interact with in the world just plays musical notes. Like the leaves, when you walk on them, play piano keys. Now let's talk about the story. At this point in the KH life cycle, I just kind of accepted the dumb stuff. I'm like, okay, Nomura, hit me with it.
I'm already half Xehanort.
I know it's the whole meme that KH is so convoluted and confusing, and it's not really a confusing story, it's just told in a really fucking poor way. And I attribute that mostly to the retcons later in the series. Those definitely confuse people, especially the extended stuff with Keyblades that people probably don't fucking know about at this point. But then they introduce something that I'm just like, I don't know about this one, Chief. And that's time travel. I'm usually a huge fan of time travel, but it eventually gets way too convoluted and fucks with your story unless you're a super competent writer. I can proudly say this is the only time I've ever had to look anything up and consult the KH wikis, because it for the most part made sense, and that was the Xehanort time travel flow chart. Because when you actually try to think and break it down, time travel is fucking stupid. The one thing that I do absolutely love is how all of the X's in everybody's name from the organization actually plays a role into this. It's fucking hilarious. I love how Leonard Nimoy hams it up as Xehanort in all of his appearances, which is a shame because I do know he is not in KH3 because he passed away before they finished recording. And Rutger Hauer is apparently Xehanort now, so I'm interested to hear what Rutger Hauer does. I'm glad Axel, or Lee now, actually got a big pivotal role in the story in this game, which I hope he plays a big role in 3. I knew going into this, though, that he gets a Keyblade at the end, and I was really against it, and that sounds really stupid. I still don't like the scene he actually gets it in the context of the game, because it's like played off as a joke, and I feel like if they just made it serious or just changed a few things, it would have been a better scene. But seeing the story play out and him getting Keyblade by the end didn't bother me as much as I thought it would, especially now that I've just accepted that the legend of the Keyblade, the Chosen One stuff has just been fucking retconned out, and that doesn't matter anymore. Lee absolutely stole the show in this game, and I wish there was more scenes of him. The black armored Ventus fight would have been cool if you could ever actually see it, because they had the great idea to have an all black armor fight in a void of black goo. One final note that I actually forgot to mention during both Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance is that I love that they allowed you to have a retry the boss button and allowed you to skip the boring same cinematic opening every single time, so I could just go straight into the combat instead of looking at the same 3 panning shots at the start of every boss fight over and over and over again like KH2 had you doing. Overall, I did enjoy playing this game. It's definitely a step up from Birth by Sleep in my eyes. There's still some glaring issues, but I just accepted it at this point because that KH2 was a lightning in a bottle, and that team that makes that game doesn't exist anymore. 0.2 Fragmentary Passage, I think, is a really fun demo. I only have really 2 issues with it. One, the critical mode sucks, but that's every game past 2, and the game runs like shit. I have a base PS4, so I don't know if the PS4 Pro makes the game run any better, but this game does not even stay at 30 FPS at all. This game is consistently at 20 and sometimes 15. There is a lot of stuttering and a lot of performance issues, and it makes me sad because I actually really enjoyed how the combat was. This is the way I would like combat styles. It makes sense. It doesn't sacrifice other combos and combo variants because you're doing the command style stuff. The magic is really fun. I guess you could add on one more thing that I would like the camera to be zoomed out more. I wish every game just had the DMC5 slider of how far do you want the camera zoomed out in combat. Every game should have this. This should just be a industry standard at this point, because hey, if you want to have your third person walkie-talkie game, that's fine, but if I want to play God of War and I want the camera zoomed out, you can let me have it. I really like the new art style, and I think this game is really pretty. It's a shame that most of the outside areas just chug because there's too much shit on the screen, especially in the backgrounds. There is a noticeable performance boost when you're in areas that are just rooms. I ended up, when being outside, just looking at the ground just so I could have a higher FPS when running around the areas. That's some Fallout 76 shit. Also, cutscenes lag because they're clearly not pre-rendered, which, if they're going to have a performance problem where cutscenes lag, I really wish they would have done that instead, because nothing takes me out of a scene like it magically dropping down to 15 frames. I don't know if this is because the game doesn't have anti-aliasing, or it's an engine issue, or a choice by design, but the hair is noticeably weird looking at the tips of everyone's hair. It looks jaggy, like it has no anti-aliasing on it, unless this is supposed to show that, oh, they have thinner hair once it gets to the end. I find this extremely distracting, and I know it is in Kingdom Hearts 3, and it's gonna drive me insane in that. 0.2 shows me that Aqua's voice actor isn't a bad actor. She is way better in this game. So either she got a lot better over time, because it has been quite a few years since Birth by Sleep, or the fact that she was just directed poorly in that game, which is what I'm leaning towards more, because I did like Terra's performance more in this game compared to Birth by Sleep. I had this ever-present feeling while playing this and watching the back cover movie, because I'm recording these two back to back. All I could think while doing this is, why do these games exist? They just feel really pointless. They basically told us things we already knew, or unnecessarily retconned things in, like retconned Aqua saving Riku from a retconned in monster that was going to attack him at the end of KH1, and then they just talk about the Kingdom Key D, and that shit's fucking confusing in and of itself. It's where Mickey's like, well, this is where Sora got the Keyblade in Destiny Island, so this is where the inverse of it is. But why? I thought they now retconned it so Keyblades are made by the users, like Kyrie's was made by herself and Riku made the Way of the Dawn. So then what are these then? The final boss of this is pretty lackluster, but the combat is fun in and of itself. I just wish it ran better, and apparently from what I've been told, KH3 doesn't run much better than this, so I'm a little worried going into it. I still haven't played it yet as the time of recording this, but I'm tempted to just buy a PS4 Pro, because apparently the only way to make the game run stable is to force it to run at 720p on the PS4 Pro, which you can't do on the base one, and the game has a lot of frame rate issues. Hopefully a patch comes out or something, or maybe it's fixed by the time I actually get to play it, because I'm making this video, but I'm not looking forward to poor performance in a really gorgeous game. For our final entry in this video, we're going to be talking about Back Cover, the 1-hour movie that's supposed to be covering stuff for the mobile games. Now, I watched some videos before watching this about said mobile games because I knew going in that this wasn't all of it. And even then, I'm just like, why was any of this necessary? Why was any of this story and lore needed? Why did we need to explain the Keyblade War? Why did we need to explain any of this? The mobile games themselves, completely fucking pointless. It's literally like the prequel memes where they just keep adding unnecessary bullshit that didn't need explaining. And then we get to Back Cover, and while it's an hour, which I appreciate because it doesn't waste my time like Recoded did, it just felt pointless. Literally one line of dialogue is actually important in this entire movie as of right now before going into KH3. So for all I know, the fucking people in the masks could have a bigger role, but I doubt it probably. And the one line that actually matters is the fact that the Master of Masters Keyblade, which is the same one that Xehanort uses, I believe it's called No Name, the eyeball thing is actually the Master of Masters eye, which is allowing him to see through the future, so he's able to write down what happens in his book, because more time travel bullshit. And God, I hate the time travel in this fucking series so much. Ray Chase, though, as the Master of Masters is fucking fantastic. He stole the show. Every time he was on scene, I was just like, yeah, give me more of the Master of Masters, which, I mean, it's good because it made me care about this character, but I doubt he's in 3. A lot of cool visuals, really didn't need to exist, could have easily just had a prologue part in 3, just to explain that Xehanort's Keyblade allows him to see through time and shit. And with that, I have finally played through all of the Kingdom Hearts games on the Story So Far collection, with a total of roughly 140 hours. If you've made it this far in the video, I just want to say thanks for watching and sitting through me rambling for an hour about 10 KH properties. I might do a video on Kingdom Hearts 3 after I play it, but it probably won't be for a while if I end up doing it because I do plan to do the Devil May Cry stuff leading up to the release of DMC5 and then my DMC5 review. If you like the video, leave a like, maybe subscribe. Hopefully you look forward to future videos from me. If you like my video or channel enough, consider maybe becoming a patron. I pretty much just use it as a tip jar to pay for my editing software subscriptions and any props or stuff for videos. As always, thank you for watching and see you next time.